March 30th of 1998, the last 911 air-cooled Porsche was delivered to its new owner. Any idea which celebrity bought it? Stick with me for a few minutes while I go back in time and explore some great automotive history, and we'll find out who bought the last air-cooled Porsche to roll off the assembly line. Hello, I'm your host, Gary Neidert, and you're listening to My First Ride podcast. During these few weeks, I've been talking about different cars with air-cooled engines. I mean, what a deal. As I've said before, you don't have to worry about the radiator. You don't have to worry about coolant, losing coolant. You don't have to worry about busted radiator hoses, busted radiators, and so forth. And so the air-cooled automotive engine was a pretty cool idea. Just wasn't much for a heater in the car. So, as I said, March 30th, 1998, the last 911 air-cooled Porsche was delivered to its new owners, a famous comedian and sitcom star. But I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. This is going to be fun to talk about the background of the air-cooled Porsche 911 and its final run. I know you're going to enjoy this story, so let's just dive right in. So the last air-cooled Porsche, as noted on the website 365daysofmotoring.com, this is what they said. March 30th, 1998, the last air-cooled Porsche 911 was delivered to its proud owner, the TV star and comedian Jerry Seinfeld. Pretty cool, huh? Now, this article I want to quote, this is from autorevolution.com. Quote, in case you didn't know that much about this particular Porsche model, the 993 Series 911, it seems that Seinfeld had it custom ordered with Euro lights, side markers, and no bumperettes. Moreover, the gorgeous-looking car has a 911 badge in the rear and a license plate with the word "last" written on it. Apparently, this is the very last air-cooled Porsche 911 that was built. What can we say? Props to Jerry for having the greatest Porsche collection ever. End quote. Great article. I'll have the link to that article so you can read a little bit more detail on it. It's not a long article, but it also has a picture of the car with Jerry Seinfeld standing next to it. Now let's get into what Wikipedia has to say about the Porsche 911. It says the Porsche 911, and it gives the German pronunciation, which although my great-grandparents came from Dresden, Germany, and Leipzig, I don't always know how to pronounce German stuff. So anyway, I won't try to do it and butcher it. The Porsche 911 is a two-door, 2+2. 2+2, that means 2 seats in the front, 2 complimentary seats in the back. Can you fit 2 adults in the back seat? I guess you could, but it would be very, very uncomfortable. Anyway, let's go on. It was a high-performance, rear-engined sports car. It was introduced in September 1964 by Porsche AG of Stuttgart, Germany. It had a rear-mounted flat-six engine and a torsion bar suspension. Remember, we talked about the Corvair, it being a flat-six air-cooled engine, similar to the Porsches. I think the Porsche had a little bit better performance, though. The car was continuously enhanced through the years, but the basic concept, it remained unchanged. The engines were air-cooled until the introduction of the 996 series in 1998. Although Porsche had used internal code numbers for each series of the 911, all models have been marketed and sold as 911s. The model series and associated internal codes are: for the 911, it was manufactured from 1963 through 1975. From 1975 through 1989, it was the 930 model. 1989 to 1994, it was the 964 model. And from 1995 to 1998, it was the 993 model. So let's talk about the Porsche 993. The Porsche 993 is the internal designation for the Porsche 911 model manufactured and sold between January 1994 and early 1998, replacing the 964. Its discontinuation marked the end of air-cooled 911 models. According to Porsche, every part of the car was designed from the ground up, including the engine, and only 20% of its parts were carried over from the previous generation. Porsche refers to the 993 as, quote, a significant advance, not just from a technical, but also a visual perspective, end quote. Porsche's engineers devised a new light alloy subframe with coil and wishbone suspension, putting behind the previous lift-off oversteer and making significant progress with the engine and handling, creating a more civilized car overall and providing an improved driving experience. The 993 was also the first 911 to receive a 6-speed transmission. The external design of the Porsche 993, penned by English designer Tony Hatter, retained the basic body shell architecture of the 964 and earlier 911 models, but with revised exterior panels, more flared wheel arches, a smoother front and rear bumper design, and an enlarged retractable rear wing, along with teardrop mirrors. So the air-cooled engines from 1993 to 1963 to 1998, So let's go back and talk about some of the details, a little bit of the history of the 911. It traces its roots to sketches drawn by Ferdinand Buzzi Porsche in 1959. The Porsche 911 was developed as a more powerful, larger, and a more comfortable replacement for the 356, the company's first model. The new car made its public debut at the 1963 Frankfurt Motor Show. It originally was designated as the Porsche 901. Now, here's where we get into the controversy of this particular car. A total of 82 cars were built and were badged as 901s. However, French automobile manufacturer Peugeot protested on the grounds that in France, it had exclusive rights to car names formed by 3 numbers with a 0 in the middle. Instead of selling the new model with a different name in France, Porsche changed the name to 911. Internally, the car's part numbers carried on the prefix 901 for years. Production began in September of 1964, with the first 911 exported to the U.S. in February of 1965. The first models of the 911 had a rear-mounted 130 horsepower Type 901 flat-6 engine. Like the 356, the engine was air-cooled and displaced 1,991 cc's, or 2 liters, compared to the 356's 4-cylinder 1,582 cc, or 1.6 liter unit. The car had 4 seats, although the rear seats were small. Could you say almost non-existent? Thus, it is usually called a 2+2 rather than a 4. A 4 or 5-speed Type 901 manual transmission was available. The styling was largely penned by Ferdinand Bootsy Porsche, son of Ferdinand Ferry Porsche. Bootsy Porsche initially came up with a notchback design with proper space for seating 2 passengers, but Ferry Porsche insisted that the 356's successor was to use a fastback styling. 7 prototypes were built based on Bootsy Porsche's original design and were internally called the Porsche 754 T7. Erwin Komenda, the leader of the Porsche car body construction department, who initially objected, was also involved later in the design. Now, what about the 912? Now, the 911-based 912 was powered by a flat 4 engine. Now, I don't know if it was based on the Volkswagen 4-cylinder engine, but it obviously had much more power. Production of the 356 ended in 1965, but there was still a market for a 4-cylinder car, particularly in the U.S. The 912, introduced in the same year, served as a direct replacement, offering the detuned version of the 356 SC's 4-cylinder 1582cc 90 horsepower boxer, but it was inside the 911 bodywork with a Type 901 4-speed manual transmission. However, the 5-speed was optional. Between 1963 and 1998, Porsche introduced many power, styling, and chassis upgrades. Engine improvements brought the horsepower from 128 to 450 horsepower. The wheelbase was increased and many refinements were implemented. The details of all the upgrades, they're too numerous to mention here, but make sure you click the link that's in the show notes to the Wikipedia page and read about what Porsche added to the 911 that helped it become so popular. In 1979, Porsche had made plans to replace the 911 with their new 928, which the 928 was a luxury Grand Tourer, say that 3 times, produced from 1978 to 1995. Originally intended to replace the company's iconic 911, the 928 combined the power, the poise, and handling of a sports car with the refinement, comfort, and equipment of a luxury sedan. Porsche executives believed that a flagship would have wider appeal than the compact 911. The 928 had the distinction of being the company's first production V8 powered model and its only coupe powered by a front-mounted V8 engine. However, the sales of the 911 remained so strong that Porsche revised its strategy and decided to inject new life into the 911 model. Peter Schutz, sorry I butchered your name. Peter Schutz, the CEO of Porsche AG from 1981 to 1987, wrote, quote, "The decision to keep the 911 in the product line occurred one afternoon in the office of Dr. Helmuth Bott, the Porsche operating board member responsible for all engineering and development. I noticed a chart on the wall of Professor Bott's office. It depicted the ongoing development schedules for the 3 primary Porsche product lines, the 944, the 928, and the 911. 2 of them stretched far into the future, but the 911 program stopped at the end of 1981. I remember rising from my chair, walking over to the chart, taking a black marker pen, and extending the 911 program bar clean off the chart. I'm sure I heard a silent cheer from Professor Bott and I knew I had done the right thing. The Porsche 911, the company icon, had been saved, and I believe the company was saved with it." End quote. Well, let's see. The 944, the 928, and the 911. Of those three, we still have the 911. The 944, limited years. The 928, we've already talked about that, limited years. The 911 still lives on. 1998, the end of the air-cooled Porsche. The Type 996 introduced in 1998 represented two major changes for the venerable 911 lineage. The body shell received its first major redesign, and the big news? A water-cooled flat-six engine replaced the popular air-cooled engine used in the 911 for 34 years. Changing to a water-cooled engine was controversial with Porsche traditionalists, who noted this as an end of the true 911. Well, that was according to the purist, and I can understand that. I kind of like the air-cooled Porsches. Kind of like them. And when I was in high school, I took a picture. There was a guy that lived in my hometown, and he would park his Porsche 911 in front of his house. And I took a couple of pictures of it. Beautiful car. And I wanted a Porsche 911. Beautiful car. It was red. It was just a beautiful car. That's when I had my Volkswagen, my convertible, and which I drove like I thought it was a Porsche. From what I could find out in my research, there were 427,057 air-cooled Porsches 911s produced from 1963 to 1997. There you have it, the end of the 911 air-cooled Porsche. Beautiful car, wonderful car. Love to have one. Prices on them have gone crazy. And there's a guy in where I live, Wiley, Texas, Dennis Collins Brothers Jeep. And I'll try to include a link to a couple of his videos of rescuing Porsche 911s. And he recently picked up a 912, I believe it was, out in West Texas. And it's pretty cool to watch those. He is he is a wealth of knowledge. Just he's got a lot of knowledge on all kinds of cars. So I'll include that link. Be sure and go watch that because it's really, really cool. So what do you think? The last air-cooled Porsche 911. Great history. Great history. Well, what's coming up next on my first ride? Well, I'm constantly searching for people that would enjoy telling the stories of their first rides and how their lives were influenced by them. And I bet you probably know someone that would be a great guest for my First Ride podcast, right? Let me know a little bit about them and their story. What about you telling your story on the podcast? Let me know a little bit about you and your first ride. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and much more. And of course, you can always go to the website at myfirstridepodcast.com. One final thought. You may not have your first ride, but you still have the memories. It's time to share them. Contact me if you have any questions regarding today's podcast, or you'd like to be a guest on My First Ride podcast. I'm Gary Neidert, and you've just experienced My First Ride podcast. Call me, 972-771-7899. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.